Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with If I Could Choose Only One Work by Composer X, it would have to be work number Gamma. Well, you got to start doing other alphabets, I think. Anyway, Composer X is the American Alan Hovhaness, who I just love. I really do, even though everything he wrote sort of sounds the same. It's actually not true. He wrote some interesting well, never mind. We can get to that. But he's really cool. And work Gamma is not one of his 70 some odd zillion billion symphonies, because he wrote like trillions of them. But no, and it's not Mysterious Mountain, which is his Symphony No. 2. It is Fra Angelico, the tone poem. Fra Angelico is gorgeous. I heard it once when I was driving home on the radio when I was in high school. And they were playing it. I was like, wow, this is amazing. What is that? It's gorgeous. And the reason it's a fabulous, typical work of Hovhaness to present to the evil god Cancrozans, who's going to destroy every piece of classical music, but for one by each composer. The reason I would describe it as typical is because it has sort of all the elements that Hovhaness's music usually does. These are, except for one. Well, okay. Here they are. They are, first of all, a sort of exotic, Eastern-tinged melody. Hovhaness was born in Massachusetts, but he wound up on the West Coast. And as a West Coast composer, he was part of this school of West Coast composers. Lou Harrison was another one, John Cage to a certain extent. But they were composers who were very, very interested in the Pacific Rim, that part of the world. They were heavily influenced by Eastern music, Eastern philosophy, Eastern religions, and they subsumed and incorporated that into their own personal styles. Now, of course, today, in our wonderful woke climate, that would have been called cultural appropriation. Now, I need to be very clear about this. I am 100% in favor of cultural appropriation, especially when it's respectful. I mean, when somebody's a genius and is gifted and does something wonderful with that which is appropriated. And Hovhaness did that. Now, Fra Angelico has that exotic sort of Eastern melody, this sense of sort of spiritual stasis or nirvana that you find in a lot of his pieces. He also was interested in a limited number of avant-garde techniques, particularly aleatoric music, or music which has a certain amount of improvisation fixed on it. One of them is like, everybody plays a little melodic fragment and they play it as many times as they want for a certain amount of time. Lutoslawski did that much later, and so did a lot of other people. Carl Nielsen did it in Sagadrom. So, it's not completely unknown. But Hovhaness made it a significant feature of his style, particularly coming up with these percussion waterfalls, which this has some of, which are marvelous. There's just bells and gongs and things. It's just wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. He's also very, very interested in counterpoint. And he wrote a lot of really beautiful fugues. And there aren't any in Fra Angelico, but there are some wonderful canons. It begins with a 3-part canon in solo violins, for example. Solo violins, while they're all sort of following each other, one after the other. And so it really does contain a lot of his stuff. It's scored for a discrete number of instruments. It's a symphony orchestra, but with limited brass, percussion, and woodwinds, treated very soloistically, almost in Baroque style, where, everything was the continuo, but for the melody instrument on top. He kind of writes that way at times. And it's all over in about 15 minutes, which is just marvelous. It's got one of his best tunes and one of his healthiest swats on the tam-tam. Oh, my God, it's gorgeous. I've had quite a bit of association with Alan Hovhaness as a composer. I was involved in the recording for Koch Records of his Symphony for Metal Orchestra, sometimes called Symphony of Metal Instruments. They couldn't decide what to call it. So it was one thing on the front of the CD and something else on the back. With the Manhattan Chamber Orchestra, where I supplied the tam-tam. It's written for giant tam-tam, and it's really a cool piece. It's for trombones and 6 flutes and a pile of percussion. And that's it. It's based on Korean folk music, which Hovhaness studied quite extensively. So that's a wonderful work of his. And I also was once corralled into a song recital at the Brooklyn Museum. He wrote a bunch of very beautiful songs, actually. One of them was for piano and baritone and tam-tam. And they needed a tam-tam. And I had the tam-tam. Goodness. So I had to go schlepping to the Brooklyn Museum with my tam-tam under my arm, and sitting over there, actually. It was very heavy and awkward, and they didn't have a music stand, and I couldn't bring one because I was in a taxi. And so I had to sort of lower it on my foot, and I had the score of the song with me, so I could line up the tam-tam part where the guy was singing it. And when it came time to hit it, I would like lift it up and go bong like that. I could show you. Well, never mind. You get the picture. And so that was that. And yes, his music is very similar. A lot of it sounds like a lot of the rest of it. He did do some avant-garde, almost atonal stuff in his earlier period, in his earliest symphonies. But, later he sort of settled into his late style and just started churning it out. And if you like the style, you like Hovhaness. If you don't like the style, you won't like Hovhaness. But Fra Angelico is a fully, marvelously characteristic piece that should tell the God Kankersans that it's a beautiful style and a distinctive style, and we should have the right to hear more of it if we feel so inclined. And I'm often so inclined. And you may well be too. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.